Hello viewers, welcome to the Bachelor course of Physical Education. Today we will discuss about instincts, its characteristics and training. Instincts. What are instinctive behaviors? And do humans ever act out of instinct rather than their own will? Instinct or innate behavior is the inherent inclination of an organism toward a particular complex behavior. The simplest example of an instinctive behavior is a fixed action pattern in which a very short to medium length sequence of actions without variation are carried out in response to clearly defined stimulus. Instinct is a term used to describe a set of behaviors that are both unlearned and set in motion as a result of some environmental trigger. Instincts are also often discussed in relation to motivation, since they can also occur in response to an organism's need to satisfy some innate internal drive tied to survival. Instincts are present across species and are consistent within individual species. In other words, many different species rely on instincts, and if one member of a species possesses an instinct, then all do. Okay students, to make the concept more clear, kindly watch this video.
Instinct or innate behavior is the inherent inclination of a living organism towards a particular complex behavior. The simplest example of an instinctive behavior is a fixed action pattern (FAP), in which a very short to medium length sequence of actions, without variation, are carried out in response to a clearly defined stimulus. Any behavior is instinctive if it is performed without being based upon prior experience, that is, in the absence of learning, and is therefore an expression of innate biological factors. Sea turtles, newly hatched on a beach, will automatically move toward the ocean. A kangaroo climbs into its mother's pouch upon being born. Honeybees communicate by dancing in the direction of a food source without formal instruction. Other examples include animal fighting, animal courtship behavior, internal escape functions, and the building of nests. Instincts are inborn complex patterns of behavior that exist in most members of the species, and should be distinguished from reflexes, which are simple responses of an organism to a specific stimulus, such as the contraction of the pupil in response to bright light or the spasmodic movement of the lower leg when the knee is tapped. The absence of volitional capacity must not be confused with an inability to modify fixed action patterns. For example, people may be able to modify a stimulated fixed action pattern by consciously recognizing the point of its activation and simply stop doing it, whereas animals without a sufficiently strong volitional capacity may not be able to disengage from their fixed action patterns once activated. The role of instincts in determining the behavior of animals varies from species to species. The more complex the neural system of an animal, the greater is the role of the cerebral cortex and social learning, and instincts play a lesser role. A comparison between a crocodile and an elephant illustrates how mammals, for example, are heavily dependent on social learning. Lionesses and chimpanzees raised in zoos away from their birth mothers most often reject their own offspring because they have not been taught the skills of mothering. Such is not the case with simpler species such as reptiles. In everyday speech, the word instinct is often used to relation or even class.
Now we will discuss what is instinctive behavior. Instincts are defined as non-learned, inherited, it can be genetic, pattern of behavior generally ensuring the survival of a species. Common examples include spinning a web by a spider, nest building and other maternal activities. Migration patterns of animals, social behavior in pack animals. Insects, animals' courtship behaviors including monogamous mating, etc. Like all animals, humans have instincts, genetically hardwired behavior that enhance our ability to cope with vital environmental contingencies. Jean-Henri Fabre, an entomologist, considered instinct to be any behavior which did not require cognition or consciousness to perform. Some behavioral scientists suggest that animals act out of instinct and humans out of will. However, the transfer of instinct from one generation to another is not well understood, although it is assumed that somehow genes are involved. Before we move into a discussion of specific type of instincts, it is important to discuss the difference between an instinct and a reflex. Both are type of unlearned behavior that end to serve a survival purpose. The difference is that a reflex is typically a simple reaction or a response to an environmental triggers, whereas an instinct is a much more complex set of behaviors. For instance, an example of reflex would be when a baby turns his head towards an object that is pressed against one cheek in an effort to nurse. The head turn is a simple reactionary process. An instinct would be the manner in which a mother bird regurgitates her food to feed her young in response to their signals of hunger. Both are reactions to environmental cues. However, the mother bird must engage in a series of much more complex behaviors in order to respond to the cues, the environment. Instincts are inborn complex pattern of behavior that exist in most members of the species and should be distinguished from reflexes, which are simple responses of an organism to a specific stimulus, such as the contraction of the pupil in response to bright light or the spasmodic movement of the lower leg when the knee is tapped. An instinct is a hardwired inborn behavior that enables a human or animal to cope with its environment. An infant grasping an object placed in the palm of his hand, breathing, a spider spinning a web, and a bird building a nest are all examples of instinctive behavior. Learned responses are not instinct. Instincts help humans and animals avoid danger, form groups, and even choose mates. Okay students, for concept clarity, let's watch video.
This video is going to have a look at innate behavior. You're going to have a look at what innate behavior is and how scientists discovered it, and you're going to have a look at how it compares to behavioral imprinting. Innate behavior then is something that is inherited. So when we talk about that, we mean something that you can naturally do or naturally feel without being trained for it to happen. So being scared of spiders is something that's innate. Now when I talk about startled, I mean something like a reflex. Now if you think back to year 10, a reflex is something that doesn't involve the brain. It's not trained, it just happens. So it's hardwired into our brains. There are a couple of examples then. The first one being the startle reflex in babies. So if you make a loud noise, it might make them cry, it might make them move their arms around to try and protect themselves. The second one is dragonflies. Now this one is slightly more complicated, but it involves the same thing. A dragonfly baby crawls out of the water, which is called a dragonfly nymph, and on its own naturally sheds its skin, which it's never been trained to do before. It can then either go back or it can fly off, which again it hasn't done before. This is all controlled by the genes. There are two other examples, one of them earthworms, which show something called as negative photoaxis and move away from the light, and sea anemones wave their tentacles more when stimulated by chemicals emitted by their prey. Okay, the next thing we're going to have a look at is Tinbergen. He's an ethologist, someone that studies behaviour of animals, and he studied the innate behaviour in herring gulls. He was born in 1907 and died in 1988, and he carried out the study in 1940. So what he noticed was that newly hatched gull chicks knew how to automatically peck at the cheek of the mother herring gull to get the mother to open up and regurgitate food. He also noticed that the herring gulls had a red spot on their beak, and he researched to find out whether it was that red spot that the babies went to. And as you can see from this graph, it was the red and black most of all, so if they had that spot, they would actually peck more often. This next section of the video then is going to have a look at behavioural imprinting. We're going to have a look at Konrad Lorenz, who was an ethologist from 1930 that did some research into geese. Now he noticed that ducklings and young geese recognised their mother straight away and followed her around, and he wanted to figure out whether this was innate or something different. So what he did was he took two sets of goose eggs, and one of them was hatched by the mother, group 1, and group 2 was hatched in an incubator with no mother. Now he made sure that the first moving object that the goose chicks saw, group 1 was the mother and group 2 was Lorenz himself. And the goose chicks in group 2, the ones from the incubator, treated Lorenz the same as group 1 did their mother. They followed him around. Now this is something called behavioural imprinting, something that they learn straight away. It's not innate. So it happens early on and it can last into adulthood. The final section then is going to have a look at choice chambers. Now a choice chamber is a petri dish which has been split into 4 sections. One section is dark and wet, one section is dark and dry, one section is light and dry, and one section is light and wet. So scientists will then put about 12 woodlice in the centre of this container and put the lid on. After 10 minutes, they'd noticed that most of them had gone to the dark and wet area. This shows that woodlice prefer damp and dark conditions, which are the conditions closest to the habitat they live in and are adapted to.
Example of instincts. Instinctual behavior has been identified across a wide variety of species. Instincts serve different purposes and show up at a different point and development depending on the purpose. Each serves and the species within which it exists. In this section, we will take a look at some of the more prominent instincts in both human and non-humans, and also examine the purpose behind each instinct. Now we talk about instinct training. The role of instincts in determining the behavior of animals varies from species to species. The more complex the neural system of an animal, the greater is the role of the cerebral cortex and social learning, and instincts play a lesser role. A comparison between a crocodile and an elephant illustrates how mammals, for example, are heavily dependent on social learning. Lioness and chimpanzees raised in ewes away from their birth, mothers most often reject their own offspring because they have not been taught the skills of mothering. Instinctive behavior goes beyond simple responses to an external stimulus. There is evidence that instinctive activity involves sequence of behavior that run a predictable course. The premise is that instinctive behavior is hereditarily based, but is also shaped by the forces of natural selection. Selection assumes that most of the outcome of instinctive activity contribute to the preservation of an individual or to the continuity of the species. However, the selection also involves the tendency to adapt to positive or negative changes in the environment that has implications for the individual's survival and ability to continue a line of brilliance. Instinctive behavior is observed more frequently in primitive life forms, while more complex mammals like humans depend mostly on learned, that is, cerebral behavior than instincts. However, human babies at birth instinctively exhibit a sucking response for obtaining food, a grasping response with hands, exploring surroundings, crying to express pain, distress and hunger, noise and facial expression conveying pleasure, happiness. Ethnologists like Conrad Lorenz, who studied animal behavior, believe that every species have a routine movements that appear to be automatic in some way related to their structural system. Lorenz gave name for these patterns fixed action patterns, where particular characteristics are associated with the body's inherent physical structure and the adaptive function of appendages. Any behavior is instinctive if it is performed without being based upon prior experience, that is, in the absence of learning, and is therefore an expression of innate biological factors. Sea turtles newly hatched on beach will automatically move toward the ocean. A kangaroo climbs into its mother pouch upon being born. Honeybees communicate by dancing in the direction of food source without formal instruction. Other examples include animal fighting, animal courtship behavior, internal escape functions, and the building of nest. Some human primal instincts are like the instinct of food, water, survival, and love. We still have these instincts, but they are suppressed because most of us live comfortable lives. We do have these instincts and they are not as strong as they used to be because we have food every day. We can get water in places that we go often. We have places to stay because our parents provide one till we can provide ourselves one. And love is in everyday life, whether we have someone to love it or if we see love sometimes during the day. One of the primal instinct we have lost as we became civilized is probably something you have heard before, and that is kill or to be killed. Some people have this primal instinct when they feel their life is in danger. Primal human instincts are sustenance, like seek sweet and fatty nutritious food, avoid eating smelly or bitter things, be cautious about novel foods, seek better resources that presently available. Gender specific, that is, they love children and the cute female more than male. Pair up, find long-term partners, female more than male. Compete for the best and for males the most. Partners, for example, show off related to defense, that is, blink, flinch and flee. Protect your own family is also primal human instinct. Obtain and defend resources, job, land, property, all are the defense instinct. Another primal instinct is sociality. They used to bond with your group, hang out with your family, try to reduce conflict within your group, compete for leadership in groups. Innate others, like beliefs, knowledge and skills. Know or learn. Be curious about stuff, make sense of things, learn about your surroundings, play with toys like objects, pets, tools, machines, etc. Explore new places, find more efficient method, be more adventurous, especially when they are young. Instincts are also seen in the form of talk, like we learn new words and more effective speech. It happens especially in the young generation. Chit-chat, commiserate, boast, scold, make jokes, entertain, all are the primal instinct. Organize others' behavior, lead your fellows. Tell and listen to story, make music, make artistic objects are also associated with the talk instincts. We can conclude that instinct is frequently defined behavior that can range from our simple response to the subject environment to high level of actions involving complex reflexes. Studies of white sharks has proven that certain instinctive behaviors may be modified through learning, but most tend toward a narrow, predictable response. So friends, this was all about characteristics and training of instinct. Hope you have understood the concept very well. Hope to see you in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye and thank you.